Genesis 6. God creates with the full plan, right? He is all-knowing, all-sovereign, all-powerful, all good, and he creates everything in a certain way. Nothing is catching him off guard. Nothing's catching him by surprise. He's never playing catch-up. He is planning all things so that we get a fuller view of him, a more robust idea of who this magnificent God is. Adam and Eve were ignorant before their fall. They didn't know what they had and why they fell, but it was a blessing because God works all things for good for his creation that loves him. And so they fall, and then they get to experience God's grace. They get to see a love in a more magnificent way because now we get to see his choice to love and how that's modeled how we should be choosing to love people. And that's why love never fails, because we choose it, we show it in action, and it never fails. We were talking like, the timelines are so, we just don't know at this point. From Genesis 3 to Genesis 6, potentially a few thousand years, because there's people on the earth, and there's things going on. And so I just heard this breakdown today, because of course I do a lot of study before we come here. And I've just found it interesting that, see if I can remember all the numbers. At the time of the flood, there was probably about 1 million people on the world already, on the earth already. Now, what's interesting about that is after the flood, we don't get to a million people, or is it I forget the numbers, but not all the way until I think it's
past
1704. Sorry, no, in the 1800s is when we get up to 1 million people again.
Oh, wow.
Wait, on Earth?
And then from 1800s to, or it might have been 1 billion by 1800s. No, 1800, 1 billion people. And then in 1920s, it was, I think, 3 billion.
Yeah.
And then from 1920s to now, we're all the way up to 8 billion.
Yeah.
And so the amount of people that are, the exponential growth of humanity. And what's interesting about that is when we get to a portion in here, that's going to come in handy. I'm not going to say it yet, because I think it's very interesting how people begin to multiply, is how this chapter opens up greatly. All right, let's go. Setting the scene, the descent of Eden, verses 1 and 2 of Genesis 6. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, the daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. So contextual bridge. Humanity is multiplying after a long genealogy of Genesis 5, right? We just went through the whole genealogy of Genesis 5, and it was actually great. I'll send you that video if you want to check it out. It's not just names, and we're like, why is this in here, right? There's actually great significance to it. Civilization is thriving. Cities, music, tools, agriculture. Genesis 4:17 through 24. Yet sin is spreading faster than progress. That potentially this progress and is amplifying the sin. Maybe that's working together, right? We're becoming more self-sufficient, and that's never good. This marks the descent from Eden. Human innovation without divine obedience. Who are the sons of God? Okay, now this is huge. This is something I don't know if you guys have thought about it much, if we've just landed on what our pastors tell us from the pulpit, or if we've actually dove into who are these sons of God. The mysterious phrase has 3 main interpretations. Now, when we read through these, again, remember, none of this stuff is salvation-based. We can all take different sides, and it doesn't matter. People get ugly and arguing about stuff, and it's like, bro, it doesn't matter. Like, we love Jesus. Jesus is the only way. Here's the 3 main interpretations. So, angelic, fallen angels view. This is the most widely acceptable view. Sons of God equals angelic beings. Other references, Job 1:6, Jude 6 through 7, 2 Peter 2, 4 through 5. Angelic beings who took human wives. Their offspring, the Nephilim, may have been hybrid mighty men or giants. Strength explains unusual wording and later giants, Numbers 13:33. Challenge, Jesus said, angels neither marry nor are given in marriage. Okay, so there's a little bit of pushback on that one. Human, the line of Seth versus the line of Cain. The view, sons of God equals godly descents of Seth, Genesis 4:26. Daughters of man equals ungodly line of Cain. Intermarriage corrupted the faithful line. The strength for this argument keeps focus on moral decline, not mythology. Challenge, the Hebrew Behen Elohim, sons of God, usually means angels elsewhere. Everywhere else in the Bible that's translated to means divine angelic beings. So that's a challenge against that view. Royal or ruler view. Sons of God equals arrogant kings or tyrants who claim divine status. Every ancient pharaoh and king always has some kind of divine, like worship me as a god idea. I'm perfect, So that's typical. Fits ancient Near Eastern cultures where rulers called themselves sons of the gods. Strength for this explains violence and oppression. Challenge depends more on cultural parallels than direct text. Why might ancient rebellion combine spiritual and physical sin? It shows how evil blurs boundaries. Heaven's rebellion echoes on earth. So where are we falling? Where do we think? Angelic, human, royal? Have we ever thought about this other than just it being angels, fallen angels? So then do we believe in actual giants on the earth at one point? And not just 9 foot tall giants like Goliath. We're talking giants. I mean, ridiculous.
Like people giants?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Offspring of angels and women.
Never heard that.
We're talking like 25 feet tall and taller. We're talking like crazy big. I know, why not? There was a lot of craziness. Again, before the flood. We are living in a different world than before the flood. And honestly, like people like the biblical or scientists that are Christian, who are doing some honest research, they're discovering more and more. They're like, you know what? I think we're also getting dumber. We were way smarter.
I guarantee you we're getting dumber.
Smaller and dumber. That's what we get. Which makes a lot of sense because think about how much evolution is so accepted and pushed for generation after generation. What does Satan do? He perverts and wants to push the opposite of God. So that makes me believe him even more. Yeah, we're getting dumber and smaller as opposed to
human.
Well, so in our timeline of like existence, we're getting bigger than the people of 100 years ago or so. But that also has to do with how corrupted our food is becoming, and we're getting bigger because all these hormones are being pumped into everything that we eat, and so generation of that, our genes are literally changing into becoming bigger, but we're not getting any smarter.
And then
I believe that. And then I think it's really important too, even like when you start to argue the facts of young Earth, old Earth from a biblical perspective, right? Some Christians will believe in evolution, but it's God who orchestrated all that, and this idea. It's like, but then we have to step back and think, okay, but God is a God of the details. And we're going to get in some of those details right now, but he didn't just wind this up and say, okay, now let's watch it go, and we'll intervene when we have to. But other than that, it's good to go. No, he's in it. He's right there in everything. He's holding it together. If he lets go, we're all doomed. And so numbers mean something to God. So the fact that if we're about 6,000 years old right now, that would actually mean a lot biblically, make a lot of sense. Even if it just means counting from after the flood, because I'm sure God sees it as like, this is a kind of a restart. So this is where I'm going to start counting from,
Does all these things, how did he let the world get so bad that he had to basically destroy what he created?
So this is when I think it comes really importantly and handy to watch our verbiage and how we're even thinking about all this. God allows, or God lets, or God... And if we can start thinking of it as like, okay, if I'm going to be claiming God's sovereignty and power and all these things that the Bible says he is, then God's not letting or allowing anything. He's planning everything for perfect use, for perfect good. Sure, we don't understand it. And that's okay. I think we're going to be faced with God with what seems like 100,000 years, but not really, because there's no time in heaven, and we're still not going to come to the end of him. So right now, in our finite minds, to try to understand, like, God, you made all of this, and then you're going to destroy everybody? Like, you're not a good God. You kill everybody. It's like, wow, what arrogance on our part, which is where a lot of people land. And so this is why I go all the way back and say, you know what? In fact, my second chapter of my book coming out soon is called Necessary Evil. And I've literally landed on, and again, you can totally disagree with all this.
There can't be any good without there can't.
You can't, the whole point of this world and why God created was he didn't need anything from us. He created so his creation would enjoy him, in return be blessed by enjoying him and seeing who he is. Adam and Eve didn't see who he was until after they sinned. That knowledge of good and evil was actually a blessing, because now, yes, it sucks. Yes, there's darkness and evil that God himself overcomes, but then we get to experience his grace and mercy and love, and to see wrath poured out on that evil. Like all these things about God we would never see otherwise. And so this is just a story of more and more illustration and more evidences of his justice and right, all these things. And so by the time we get face to face with him, we're like, God, you've done so much and you are so good. What a magnificent, powerful God we love and serve. as opposed to just like, wow, you're really big and glorious. I'm glad you created me. Thanks, God.
That's why faith
No.
is so.
And so, like, as we break this down, hopefully we can dig into that thought a little more, because that is important though too, because we can't think that God is unjust or that God is unkind or that God isn't always good, but let's see if we can get there. Well, and that adds a lot of evidence to this theory of mine, which I think is biblical, of God could have just started over and said, oh, let's try it again, and maybe not give him we're not going to give him the ability to sin. That'd be better, because then there won't be any of this going on. The very thing that's going to happen to us in heaven, we won't be able to sin anymore, except we're going to be smarter and even more like powerful and like all these things that the angels were, and they still sin. So the fact that the ability to sin is held in God's hand, and the fact that he either gives it or takes it away, and so that's some hard stuff to wrestle with, but I like wrestling with these big concepts, because then it makes us be like, my head's going to explode with how big God is, and I think that's good for us. Don't be comfortable with God. The second you're comfortable with him, there's a problem.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean you have to be afraid of him. That just means like, this is a very big God, and he knows me and he loves me. Oh, I'm all good, man. Because he also promises all good to those who love him.
Yeah. Amen.
We're good.
Yeah.
Well, those are the fallen angels, the original sin, right? Satan
Yes.
Satan wants to be worshipped, and so he's cast out, and he takes the third of the angels with him. How did that happen? You know what I
I
think?
guess I'm thinking about the heavenly
And
angels.
even
Yeah.
David.
Well, no, if they're still up in heaven, they're not sinning. If they sin, they're out.
David made
And the angels look down on us in awe. We are made in the image of God. They are not. So when the angels are looking down at the women, and there's obviously some kind of, because it says in other parts of the Bible, I might reference it in here, I can't remember, but of angels taking human form. We know they can do that. And I honestly, so the reason why I think that Satan was able to take the third of the angels, we ever thought about that? Just like, why are the angels just like following Satan? What the heck? You're in the presence of God and you're following Satan? Like, what's going on? Well, if he's got this heart of, I want to be worshiped like God, then it's real easy to go to the other angels and look down at this world that we're already fascinated by, and this human creation made in the image of God, and say, hey, guess what? We can trick them into worshiping us like gods. And so you get every other false religion powered by fallen angels and demonic forces, and they're getting worshiped by God. How tempting, and they fell for it. This is why, again, I say, so our starting place, I think why it's emphasized so much by Jesus himself, saying our starting place with everyone should be love and respect. And so love God above all else and love each other as Christ has loved them, has loved us. Because what people are experiencing in their false religions, we can't just wipe them off as they're just garbage and aren't real. No, what they're experiencing is really real, because there's really power there. They're not dumb. They're not just making things up. They're literally experiencing powers and this inner peace and all these things because it's real. But we have to emphasize the people, but it's second best and it leads to destruction. Jesus himself is all powerful. Jesus himself offers eternal salvation. Everything else leads to death. And that way it's easy to get to people, because if you're just sitting across from somebody who's a Buddhist or a witch or it doesn't matter. You can't, and you just say, oh no, that's all fake. It's all in your imagination. That's not really, like, no, what are you talking about? Get out of my face, right? So let's respect and love people enough to be like, I understand that's, yeah. Some of us come from that background, and we can say, yeah, I've seen some real things. It's not good. Christ himself is number one. See what I mean? We've done 2 verses and it's already been 25 minutes. All right, the Nephilim and the giants, verse 6:4. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards. Remember that. That's very interesting. And also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and they bore children to them, these were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Word study. Nephilim literally means fallen ones, from Hebrew nephal, to fall. Later associated with Anakim, Rephaim, giants who opposed Israel. Numbers 13:33, Deuteronomy 2-3. 2 main views: literal giants, or superhuman warriors; physical giants, possibly remnants of hybrid corruption; or figurative oppressors, violent conquerors, mighty men whose fame came through domination. Why do giant legends appear in nearly every ancient culture, right? Because if people want to deny it's not giants, again, it's not a literal thing. It was just something, these whatever great warriors or whatever. But in every culture, there's images drawn and there's stories of giants, big
I think-
people. No, because when if you're taking scriptures away or books away or whatever, however you want to name it, that's essentially you have to add doctrines to explain the rest of the Bible. This is why systematic theology, whole Bible doctrines need to be built. Because if you believe this to mean this over here and that contradicts this over here, you're wrong.
Yeah.
We need, okay, then how do I understand these to make sense together? To make it, oh, that's what makes sense together. That's the doctrine. It actually becomes really easy then to understand the Bible, to understand when you're hearing false doctrine, to understand, right, a lot more. And so this is why I feel it's so important to be going through the entire Bible so we can start understanding and referencing New Testament and just finding out, oh, okay, this all really does work together. More than just it's a long story that works together, yes, but it's eternal significance truths that needs to work together in our minds too, so that we aren't swayed to and fro by every wind and doctrine that we hear. Because that's what the Christians of the world are going to be, in the end times, are going to be doing. They're just going to be like, oh, you're saying Jesus, so then I believe everything you're telling me. You're saying God and you're opening the Bible, and so whatever comes out of your mouth must be true. And we need to be more diligent than that. Taking our thoughts captive. God's grief and human corruption, verses 5-7. The Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually all the time. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. Observation, humanity's moral collapse is total. Every intention, only evil continually. Sin now resides in imagination and desire, not just behavior. This is the doctrine of total depravity, corruption reaching the heart's core. God's response, God was sorry. Do we know what anthropomorphic means? Because when we read this, we should be asking questions immediately. Like, his heart?
Can breathe underwater?
He was sad? Like,
But I like that definition.
Sorry.
That's all good.
all it means is human language describing divine. So, or just human, really, it's supposed to be just human language describing something that's not human. So God's not human, he's divine. And so it's trying to make us see God's state in this moment. Now, God isn't changing. And God isn't reacting. So if that's true, again, let's go full Bible, then how do we understand this to be? Not reacting and unchanging, but his heart hurts and is grieved, and okay, so what? So then what's the point we're supposed to be taking from this if it's just this anthropomorphic language, right? What are we supposed to be taking from that we've grieved God or they've grieved God? And yes, we grieve God too. It's like when you watch your child grow up and choose things that are going to lead them to destruction. It grieves you because you know what's going to happen. Maybe we'll never understand. We may never see the fruits, the so-called goodness that God is working out. We might not see it here. But I promise and guarantee one day, whether here or not, we're going to be like, oh, okay, God was working something good. I feel like we draw some comfort, be like, man, when I get to heaven, I got so many questions for God. It's like, no, you don't. I mean, you might, but when you're face to face with this glory, oh God, let me worship you now and forever. So as we struggle with these things too, if we're not understanding that we can call out to God, that we can sit in silence and be like, Jesus, I don't understand this. Holy Spirit, help me. Give me some kind of wisdom or peace or whatever. But I need the thoughts that I have right now aren't working. Meet me here, Well, and so that's the problem too, is like, and even later on we find, God's commanding his people to go literally, utterly destroy man, woman, and child, and animals, completely wipe all of them out. Oh my God, God is a dictator, and he's a evil, bloodthirsty, yada, yada, yada. But what we don't understand is the kinds of evil, the very kinds of evil that we would see on the news and be like, oh my God, kill them immediately. And way worse. From cannibalism to all kind of bestiality, and I mean, we're talking the most evil things you can think of, and then some. And just the either village or the world at this point littered with, that's all that's happening. Oh God, then get rid of them. Right? We just think like, oh no, they had some bad thoughts and they got in arguments. No. So it's not a change in God's nature, but a revelation of his holy grief. His justice flows from a brokenhearted holiness, not cold rage. Noah found grace. Okay, this is interesting too. So verses 8 through 10. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. The only other person that said to walk with God is Enoch. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Favor, translated grace. First direct mention of grace in Scripture is the first time we get grace. At least it's referenced, but we see lots of grace already. Amid judgment, grace appears, unearned, undeserved. Noah's character, righteous equals right standing before God. Blameless equals integrity among his peers. Walked with God, intimate relationship. Relationship precedes righteousness. Grace produces obedience. Typology of Christ, because remember, all these characters are pointing to Jesus. It's not about us. We're not the main characters. God is. Noah is a type of Christ, one righteous man through whom the world is saved. The ark is Christ himself, one door, one refuge, one way of salvation. Genesis 7:16. And the Lord shut him in. God himself secures salvation. Couple ideas of this, because we just take this like Noah was favored by God, just as like, okay, so yeah, he was holy, cool. Another way to understand this favor found by Noah was simply that his bloodline wasn't corrupted by this Nephilim crossbreeding hybrid stuff. So just simply like he wasn't infected by this yet. That's another understanding of it, which makes a lot of sense too. And then that's going to play a part too later on, because how are the Nephilim afterwards as well? Remember, it says later the Nephilim were in those days and also afterwards. And so that's going to come up later. Verse 11. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make the end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark are 300 cubits, and its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to the cubit above, and set the floor of the ark on the inside. We're getting details of God, right? He didn't say just go make a big ark and enough to fit a bunch of animals. He's giving them exactly. And Noah isn't coming from a line of carpenters or boat makers, okay? So God literally has to instruct him on everything. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on earth shall die, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives, and every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark and keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing on the ground according to its kind. 2 of every sort shall come and keep them alive. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Why? Because he had faith. That's exactly why I think it's important for us to understand the corruption that was on the earth of the defilement of God's image, these angels and humans,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Okay, yeah.
It wasn't just bad people becoming bad. It was like literally corrupted through genes
worship of
manipulation,
other- yeah.
And so when we get to Revelation, or even just the conversation of Revelation is important, because that's when we start to understand when it says it'll be like the days of Noah. In Revelation it says that.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, what does that mean?
Well,
Well,
and it makes
one,
sense.
mankind is multiplying like crazy. That was the point of that earlier talk. And the image of God being corrupted again, image of God being corrupted again, right? All this gender
Yeah.
nonsense,
Yeah.
right? Just Satan is working his magic to make everything very confused and perverted and
I also
dark.
find it
all right. Let's break down this 11 through 13. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence, and God saw that the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, and all the fish and everything. So explanation: violence means moral cruelty, bloodshed, and social collapse. All right. So we had Cain and Abel. That was the first time that was like, what is that? Right. And I always find it fascinating, because did Cain even really know what was going to happen. We don't even know how he killed Abel, and so like, what means. But that opened up something. Humanity has corrupted its way, not just individual sin, but systematic global rebellion. All flesh equals totality of human and even animal corruption. Creation itself is groaning. I mean, he literally says that the world, where in one of the verses, the world is corrupt, everything is corrupt. God's judgment is both righteous and measured. He saw, determined, and will destroy, showing deliberation, not rage. Sin's natural consequences is decay, moral, social, and eschatological. I love to teach because I have to teach in secular addiction and mental health recovery centers. That's what I do for my day. Not allowed to talk about Jesus unless somebody asks. And so, got to get real creative with how to spread some kind of light and love and, like gospel conversations without ever talking about it. And I'm getting pretty good at it. It's pretty cool. But I like to point out to people like bad decisions, sin, has natural consequences. Start doing the things that don't have negative consequences. Then you're going to sleep around. Guess what's going to happen? Right? You're going to do drugs. Guess what's going to happen? Take God out of the equation. It doesn't even matter. There's natural consequences. So stop doing all the natural consequences or not, all the things that have the consequences that are negative. So negative, destroying yourself. That proves that way of life to be false. If you have to take all kinds of drugs and have to watch out for that and all watch out just to prevent your lifestyle or to encourage your lifestyle, but prevent the bad things in your lifestyle, there's something wrong with your lifestyle. I think Satan's favorite religions are the ones that talk about Jesus and reference, like, they call themselves Christians too, and he can just completely distort who Christ is. So verses 14 through 16, as he starts breaking down how to make it out, or how to make the ark, explanation, God gives precise blueprints. This is not a mythic vessel, but a real practical command. The ark size, about 450 feet long. So let's talk in, the human terms that we can kind of understand. 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Would have the stability of modern cargo ships. So they now know that the measurements that this ark is like perfect measurements. There's a couple ships that are made in almost the exact measurements that are like 100 or even older years old that are just still in perfect working condition. Go figure, God knows what he's doing. Pitch, the Hebrew kopher, but some root as kopher, to cover or atone. So see, God is always working these images of Christ coming in. The ark is covered for protection, just as believers are covered by atonement. One door symbolizes the one way of salvation, foreshadowing John 10:9. Jesus says, I am the door. God's salvation is specific, not vague. He doesn't ask Noah to improvise. He gives revelation, not suggestion. The verses 17 through 18, for I will bring floodwaters upon and destroy all flesh. Explanation first, biblical mention of a covenant is right here. When we say in 18, but I will establish my covenant with you, this is the first reference, and covenant becomes such an important thing. Even before the flood begins, grace precedes obedience. God promises relationship and rescue. The covenant is not a contract, it's divine mercy guaranteed survival for Noah's family. The flood serves both as judgment for sin and purification for renewal. God's covenant always has two sides, judgment of sin and mercy to the righteous through grace. I honestly wish that our Bibles were not Old Testament, New Testament, but Old Covenant, New Covenant. If I ever made a translation, that's what I would call them. Verses 19 through 21, and then the command bringing everything living thing two at a time. Yeah. God's mercy extends beyond humans. His creation mandate continues. Keep them alive, right? God loves all his creation. Noah's obedience preserves biodiversity. This is a creation care under divine instruction. The animals shall come into you. So Noah doesn't have to go out and, okay, you got a long walk ahead of you. You got to start gathering all these animals. No, the animals are going to come to you. Shows divine sovereignty. God gathers, Noah obeys. God's plan includes both survival and provision. Even in judgment, he sustains. God's redemptive plan always preserves life. Judgment never erases his creative heart. Verse 22, Noah did this, and he did all that God commanded him. That right there is, I pray, is what I'm remembered for. What God is, well done, my good and faithful servant. That's what I want. he did this and he did all that God commanded him. A short verse, but profoundly powerful. Noah's faith is revealed through obedience, not argument. This verse echoes through the New Testament in Hebrews 11:7. Faith acts even when it doesn't see. All right, Noah didn't know. Okay, I know there's a flood coming. I've never built something like this before. The animals are coming to me. Okay, let's go. Faith obeys before it understands. Salvation begins with trust in divine instruction, not human logic. So some of the measurements, like put the ark in like comprehensible terms, I think it was a football field and a half long. And then this must have been a mistake because the way he said it was 7 car spaces wide. But I was in a parking lot when I saw that, and I'm like, that's really thin.
No way.
There's no way it was that thin. And then with those measurements, I forget all the square footage you broke down. There's some book that's written that like these scientists break down, mathematicians break down all this, mathematically is really cool. But something like 125,000 sheep-sized animals could fit inside this ark. And so granted, there's bigger ones and smaller ones. And again, I don't think Noah brought any full-grown animals. I think they were all young, smaller animals. But with that measurements, they didn't even have to be. Just trying to think of all the fun stuff I heard about. So there's also an argument. Has anyone heard the non-global flood theories? That it was localized?
Yeah.
And there's some good arguments for it, but yeah, it wasn't worldwide, but
To them it was. It's our
Exactly.
view of the world.
Exactly.
yeah.
That-
And again, though, like we have another thing pro world flood is there's every culture has some kind of tale of a global flood,
Yeah.
and so that's a little sus.
Noah's flood is not the flood.
A lot of the time, or just like when we get like our Bible is amongst the many other proofs that it holds its authority as being an historical accurate document, is that it just tells the story. You get the good and bad and ugly of everyone. Every other ancient writing is going to tell you only the positive and lie about the rest. And so all their leaders and all their, Moses and their stories are grand and divine and wonderful and perfect. We're saying, no, Moses was unfaithful. And David was a murderer and Paul's a murderer and everyone's a screw up. It's Jesus alone who deserves all praise and glory. And it's by his strength and mercy and great, right? That's the difference of ours.